Morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock according to my clock, but unfortunately the one in the chamber is running a bit slow, so we're going to go by what our laptops tell us, this is now 10 o'clock. So welcome everyone to the formal meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Rob Kendrick and I'm chairman of the committee. I'd like to welcome all members and officers present today, both attending here in the council chamber and on Teams. In particular, when he arrives, I would like to welcome Councillor Tom Smith, who's joined our committee in place of the Conservative vacancy, and Thomas Crofts, who's our new Democratic Services Officer. Welcome, Thomas. The video feed of this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are watching our meeting online today. I'd also welcome Councillor Mrs. Patricia Bradwell, OBE, Executive Council for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement, who I know is in the building, and her Executive Support Councillor, Councillor Stephen Rowe, who I know is also here and will probably join us later on in the meeting. Also a welcome to the following senior officers from Children's Services: Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director, Early Help; Martin Smith. Where's Martin? Is he with us? He's joining us later, who is an Assistant Director for Children's Education. So that's the opening announcements. The usual health and safety announcement: there's no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through reception into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until further instructions. And again, another usual announcement: can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles and other devices are on silent? And also, when you're invited to speak, can you please ensure you switch your microphone on? Otherwise, the officers attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening to our meeting online obviously won't be able to hear you. But please be aware you need to speak directly into the microphone to be heard. If you wish to ask a question during the course of the meeting, please raise your hand. My Vice Chairman, Councillor William Gray, will make a note of those who wish to speak. So that's the opening announcements. Let's move on to the business of the agenda for the day. And item 1 is apologies for absence and replacement members. Tom, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Tyrrell and Alex Sayer, and we have Councillor Kev Clark replacing Councillor Mrs. Killey for this meeting only.
And I understand Heather Sandy, Executive Director, Children's Services, Janice Spencer are.
That's correct. Apologies from officers, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chairman. I was just going to say, as you've said already, there are a couple of key apologies today, and I just wanted to explain why that might be. So we're very pleased and privileged that we have a visit today from Amanda Spielman, who is the head of Ofsted. I have to say, she's not visiting Lincolnshire in an inspecting capacity, but is coming to see some of the great work that we do in Lincolnshire. So there'll be a number of officers that will be coming in and out of the meeting as we meet with her through the morning, and that might also be where Councillor Bradwell is this morning too. And I've just got one other little thing to say, which was really pleased to say that this week we have had a virtual visit from the Care Quality Commission, who is the organisation with which all health providers are registered with in relation to our 0 to 19 health service, so our health visiting service. And they are conducting all their monitoring visits virtually, and visiting only providers of services that they have concerns about. And I'm delighted to tell you that they won't need to visit our services, because they were assured around the quality of the delivery across the board in terms of all of our services, and just also to say that our performance is still also above national. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very reassuring and encouraging. Councillor Rowe, you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I've just left Councillor Mrs. Bradwell. She has gone and joined that meeting, and my apologies for being late.
Thanks very much. I think it's just going to be that sort of thing today when we've got a visitor. So we can move on to item 2 now, which is declarations of members' interests. Members of the committee are reminded that they only need to declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interest forms. Do any members wish to declare an interest this morning? No. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 3 on the agenda, which are the minutes of the Children and the Young People Scrutiny Committee held on the 14th of January 2022. And this is, of course, to sign, confirm and sign the minutes from the meeting of that date as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and seconder on the minutes? Councillor Whittington and Councillor Sear. Thank you very much. Will all those in favour, we're now going to vote on this, and you're voting whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Any against? No. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you. That's the minutes agreed. We now move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is announcements by the chairman, executive councillors and chief officers. I just have a couple of announcements to make. Committee members should have received an invitation to a corporate parenting workshop on Tuesday the 5th of April at 2 p.m. The purpose of this workshop is to explore the challenges of young children and young people coming into care and the work being undertaken by the virtual school to improve the achievements and outcomes for those in care. Members will also hear from Bernardo's, who provide the Lincolnshire Leaving Care Service, regarding their support of care leavers and the challenges faced in engaging care leavers in education, employment and training. This is a great opportunity to improve our knowledge about children in care and care leavers, and I would encourage all members of the committee to attend this workshop if they can. And the other point I want to mention this morning is, along with Councillor Rowe and Councillor Gray, I attended the Big Conversation 22 event in Spalding on the 16th of February, where we had the opportunity to meet with children in care and care leavers, and the event was focused on what children in care and care leavers wanted from their social workers and key workers in order to support them. And updates were also provided from V4C and Children in Care Council and Bernardo's, and I found that a very informative visit. It's good to hear from people who are actually using our services, hearing firsthand their experiences and the comments they had to make. So that was a very worthwhile event for, I think, all of us. Finally, I'd just like to make everybody aware that once again I'm intending to have a 10-minute comfort break before item 7 on the agenda. This is a regular fixture, as regular members will know that we have a break part way through our meeting. So do we have any officer announcements? Joe, you've already mentioned some of the things. Anything further you wish to say? Councillor Rowe, anything on behalf of Councillor Bradwell?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We then move on to item 5, which is the single section 75 agreement for children and young people's mental health services and council funding. Now, this item is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to decision by the executive on the 5th of April this year. And I'd like to welcome Kevin Johnson, Programme Manager, Children Integrated Commissioning, who will be presenting this report, and also welcome to Sarah Gregory, Commissioning Manager, Children's Strategic Commissioning, who's in attendance to help answer any questions. So it's over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the paper that's been presented to you today covers a number of aspects related to children and young people's mental health commissioning. So I'll summarise each of the recommendations and provide a bit more information as we go through them. Just to note that the recommendations have been supported by a number of relevant boards prior to reaching this point, including Children's Executive DLT, Lincolnshire Schools Forum, the Council's Commissioning and Commercial Board, along with Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust and Clinical Commissioning Group, key officers, and also the Joint Commissioning Overview Group. There are some updates pertinent to these decisions following the Joint Commissioning Overview Group that happened on the 24th of February, which was after this paper was submitted, so I'll update on those as well. So the first key element of the paper is regarding the future commissioning arrangements from 1st of September 2022. So the Council currently has an agreement with NHS Lincolnshire Clinical Commissioning Group that's made under Section 75 of the NHS Act for the pooling of funding and delegation of lead commissioning arrangements to the Council relating to children and young people's mental health services. And that includes the Council's recurrent contribution towards CAMS within that pool budget, the CCG funding towards CAMS, children and adolescent mental health services. The CCG contribution towards some emergency residential beds in Lincolnshire, and funding for mental health support teams. So the first recommendation is in relation to entering into a new Section 75 agreement with NHS Lincolnshire CCG, or as it will be at the time, the new Integrated Care Board, from the 1st of September 2022 for up to 5 years. And that will be for the same purpose, but also expanding the pooled funding to also include ongoing funding that's agreed by both the Council and the CCG into Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, which is our early intervention, emotional wellbeing, mental health service. So there are currently 2 Section 75 agreements in place that relate to the commissioning of mental health services, both of which are currently agreed until the 31st of August. One is between the Council and Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust to delegate the delivery of CAMS, Specialist Mental Health Support delivery. And the other is between the Council and LPFT to deliver Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and mental health support teams, which both provide early intervention support for low to moderate emotional and mental health concerns, and also mental health promotion and prevention in terms of Healthy Minds Lincolnshire. So a new single Section 75 agreement is recommended from the 1st of September 2022, again for up to 5 years. But that, instead of being 2 separate agreements, will be 1 single agreement covering all children and young people's mental health services. So that's Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, mental health support teams, and CAMS, specialist mental health service. And that will obviously help us simplify governance arrangements and contract and commissioning arrangements, but also allow more flexibility in terms of resourcing and transformation of those services as we move forward. So the next set of recommendations relates to the ongoing council funding towards children and young people's mental health services. So in terms of child and adolescent mental health services, the council is recommended to continue to invest the same amount of funding as we have done previously, which is £724,589 into that service, and that's in relation to delivering the council's statutory duties around ensuring the emotional well-being and mental health of children and young people, particularly those in care. Due to significant pressures on the high needs block of the designated schools grant, which kind of have risen since the service was first commissioned in 2017, that budget is used to fund 50% of Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, so £1 million investment. And it's recommended that the council starts a tapered diversion of this £1 million investment from September 2022 to be fully realised by 2024. And as I say, that's to manage the pressures on that budget and ensure the council can meet its statutory duties around children and young people with SEND. Since this paper was submitted, the Clinical Commissioning Group at the Joint Commissioning Overview Group has agreed the recommendation to match this diversion with tapered investment towards Healthy Minds Lincolnshire by 2024. So that will offset the council's tapered diversion of the funding back to the designated schools grant. It's recommended that the council continues to invest the other 50% or £1 million funding towards Healthy Minds Lincolnshire from the public health grant to continue to meet the council's statutory public mental health duties in relation to children and young people. The next recommendations relate to working in partnership with Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust to develop a hybrid model for Lincolnshire across Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and mental health support teams. And that's to be implemented from September 2022. There's some duplication across Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and mental health support teams in relation to the delivery of early interventions for low, moderate emotional wellbeing and mental health support. The mental health support team model is a fairly prescribed model from NHS England, and it's more costly than Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, and there are concerns that kind of as we roll it out further that it's not well suited to a rural county because of the limitations of the model. So we need to minimise any or eliminate any wastage due to duplication and ensure that we have an equitable county-wide offer. The other recommendation is about undertaking a wholesale review of children and young people's mental health services during 2022, resulting in a programme of children and young people's mental health service transformation. So really we need to work with partners to fully understand the impacts of the pandemic on children and young people's mental health services, including newly highlighted health inequalities, and enable clear coordination and prioritise planning for long-term transformation. That's based on strong feedback and population health data, and the aim is to co-produce services for the future that will deliver better outcomes for more of our children, young people and families. And the final recommendation is regarding the delegation of further decision making as we implement these new commissioning and funding arrangements and as we progress through the review and developing new models. So that recommendation is to delegate the authority to approve the final form of any agreements and the profile of funding diversion and the hybrid model of Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and mental health support teams to the Executive Director for Children's Services in consultation with the Executive Councillor, and for them to make future decisions about the model and use of funding over the 5 years of the new Section 75 agreement. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's now over to members for questions and comments. Do we have any members indicating? Councillor Gray.
Yes, Councillor Clark.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Clarification really. On page 21, it says mental health problems start before, in children before the 14. Today's children and young people have worse mental issues than the previous generation. I'm just wondering, you know, why is that? And does it follow then that the next generation will have worse mental problems and issues than children of today? Thank you.
I'll be honest, that's quite an in-depth question to go into kind of in a response, but I'll be happy to do some more research and feedback to the committee about that. But I mean, I think in general, it's kind of a reflection of modern life, social media, a lot of impact of kind of just the lifestyle that kind of families are living nowadays with more parents working, kind of different home lifestyles, and just various online gaming, etc. There's a massive amount of research out there about kind of what is impacting on children's mental health, and of course more recently the lockdowns and the pandemic, and that's really what we want to kind of step back and try and understand how we can structure our services to kind of better respond to those changing needs now and predict what's going to happen in the future.
Thank you.
I was just going to say it's a really good question, and I think we're all aware of the impacts of the pandemic on children and young people, and I guess that's why our Healthy Minds Lincolnshire is available for children that attend a school in Lincolnshire. So although it talks about starting before the age of 14, those services are available to younger children, and then our kind of all of our other wraparound services that are available for children also take into account those needs for younger children and also for their parents, which is crucial in that as well.
Thanks very much. Yes, it's an issue that's been very much to the fore during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Councillor Matthews, I believe you have a question.
Thank you. This is going to sound like a really weird question because it is a really weird question. Sorry. First off, I don't know if I should have declared an interest because Lincolnshire County Council have asked me to be a governor for LPFT. So I don't know if I should have declared an interest. And then, and I'll leave that with you, Chair, to decide. And if I haven't, if I did need to, I have now. And then my second one is, we talk about S75 without me having a truly good grasp of what an S75 agreement is, and I'd really appreciate someone explaining technically what that means. And then the third part is, how do we monitor these contracts? Because there's, so the fourth part of that is, how much is actually this all costing? Because we talk about rolling another 2 into this one. This one's 1.7 million, 1.8 million. How much actual money are we spending? Is the Lincolnshire County Council committing to work in partnership with LPFT and the NHS? So what's the total spend of all these contracts? And again, I'll go back to how are we monitoring the quality of service and the value for money of those contracts over time? And then my final personal thing is that what my role is as a foundational governor, to ask questions in their governors' meetings, or is it done through officers? Sorry, I said it was a weird question, but...
That's all right, Councillor Matthews. We'll take advice as regards your role at LPFT. But I think the point you make about asking questions, from what I can remember from my time in LPFT, was that, yes, governors do ask questions of the management, as it were, of the trust. So anyway, answers to Councillor Matthews' questions, please.
You go, Sarah. I know Sarah's very well placed, and Kev, to answer most of those questions. So you start. Is that okay?
So just to answer the question around the Section 75 agreement, so that is almost like a framework agreement that we can enter into under the NHS Act 2006. So it's almost like a public-to-public collaboration agreement. So that is a Section 75 agreement, which is almost like a partnership agreement, as I say. So it enables us to work in partnership with an NHS body, so LPFT, where we can delegate some of our functions to LPFT to deliver on our behalf. Does that help in terms of that question? In terms of the monitoring arrangements, so we have robust monitoring arrangements in place. So we have regular what's called partnership board meetings, contract management meetings, if you like, whereby they submit all of their quarterly monitoring reporting, and we go through that. But in addition to that, we also have a lot of contract assurance work that we do, as well as what we call sometimes operational meetings, so that is something, a cycle that we do throughout the year. And then in terms of the cost, I think just in terms of these agreements, we're not saying that we're going to be spending any more than what's in the report. What we want to do is bring it under one Section 75 agreement, so that it enables us to make the best use of that financial resource across the system, and so that we can have those services working much more seamlessly together. Does that help in terms of that one?
Thank you. It does, and it looks as though the one we're discussing today is well managed and well maintained, but they're not all perhaps as well managed as well maintained. Does that mean there's a general improvement in our relationship with the service provision through LPFT by linking them together?
I think in terms of, so currently we've got 2 Section 75 agreements in place with the CAMS and then Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and MHSTs. So those 2 are well managed, and we do have contract managers that in our team that do work very closely together. So Kev and I work closely together. So those 2 are well managed, but what we want to do, as I say, is have one arrangement which enables us to do things even better.
I was just going to say as well, in terms of, I think it's about avoiding duplication, and as this cohort of young people move across those services, pulling it all together means that that can be more seamless as well, because as we know, children and young people's needs don't fit neatly into particular boxes, but having them as a provider across all the services really helps that, and this arrangement will further strengthen that work across.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Colin?
Sorry, just for clarification, when I used the words well managed, it was that duplication that I was referring to from the notes. It wasn't about management. I misspoke, and thank you very much for that very clear answer.
Thanks very much. In fact, it preempted a question I was going to ask, was about would this be a more streamlined approach and better communication between the different elements, and the nodding heads seem to indicate that's part of the plan.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what we want to do is be able to have those conversations. I mean, we already join up as much as we can across the services, but just having them under the one agreement means that we can discuss moving resources more fluidly across both workforce and financially, depending on where the demand is at early intervention or specialist services. It means that we can have conversations that kind of cover the whole breadth of kind of that early intervention right up through specialist, right up to crisis services, without having to kind of go through and vary two different agreements all the time and try and move money across agreements.
Yeah.
Just really quickly as well, I was just going to say, in terms of Lincolnshire being in a really fortunate position in that we had Healthy Minds before the development of, and I always get it wrong, the MHSTs, which was a government development which really was to provide support, because in lots of areas across the country that support of Healthy Minds wasn't there. So this is something that's developed where we've already got an existing service, and it's about maximising and, you know, that provision collectively rather than duplicating, if that makes sense. So it was about the unique context of Lincolnshire. I think that presented that challenge, a positive challenge, but a challenge about maximising our resource.
Thanks very much, Councillor Smith, and you weren't here at the moment when I welcomed you in your absence, and I hope you find it a rewarding and interesting experience being a member of the committee. So your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure I will, and apologies for my late arrival. I've got 2 points, if I may. Personally, I have concern around in point 123. It talks about transfer between CAMS, children and young people, children and adolescents, mental health service to adult services. I'm aware personally of numerous instances where transport basically doesn't take place. The individual concerned goes into an ether and then has to tell their story again and be referred again, and the process starts again, which, as I'm sure officers appreciate, is exceedingly traumatic, not just for the young, the now adult, but also their families, because they're dealing with it and trying to support them as best they can. I was wondering what sort of stringent performance mechanisms we've got or around that, and if there's any thing we can do around sort of keeping an eye on that to make sure it's done correctly. And going back to Councillor Clark's point about the prevalence of mental health issues in intergenerations, the fact that it's gone up from 1.9 in 2017 to 1.6 in 2020 is deep in such a very short space of time. For that level of jump is deeply disturbing, because yes, COVID will have had an impact, but I'd be very alarmed if that was all entirely caused by COVID, and it'd be very good to know in more detail what's causing it. Whether it is, as Kevin said, it's change of family life, it's external factors, or if it's something more sinister almost. There's something we're missing that we're not picking up, because that is we're already on a time bomb with this from the pandemic, but we're on a really big time bomb. If that prevalence keeps increasing, soon it's going to be 1 in 1 at the rate it's going, and then we're going to have a real big problem. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, so thank you for those questions. So in terms of transitions, this is something that is a priority within the NHS long-term plan, and it's something that we're very conscious of. We do have some transition arrangements that should prevent kind of what you described from happening, but unfortunately don't always, whereby kind of if a child and young person that's been open to CAMS is coming up to 18, they do have transition arrangements if they know they are moving into adult mental health services. But unfortunately, because at the moment of the cut off of commissioning being done by children, young people services, and then adult services, there are different eligibility criteria for people moving in, so it's not always the case that it moves on. It's absolutely something that we want to work on as part of the review that I mentioned, and we are looking at working with the adult mental health transformation team as part of the review, so that we can work on all age pathways. So yeah, so hopefully that answers the first question around transitions. In terms of the prevalence, I mean, it's very difficult. It's over the last kind of 2 years, as you'll appreciate, there have been kind of just complete changes to the normal seasonality that we'd expect in terms of children and young people accessing mental health services. And although kind of we saw an initial kind of dip and then a spike in referrals, that is higher now than it has been. I suppose we do not know how kind of as life returns more to normal, whether it will decrease or whether it will stay at that level. Certainly the worry is if it does stay at that level that we need to really review our models and make sure that we can meet that increased demand. Certainly kind of the major target in the NHS long-term plan is around increasing access, and that's why kind of obviously we've got 4 mental health support teams at the moment. By 2024 the plan is to have 8, which will be covering about 50% of the county. Obviously continuing our investment in healthy minds, and I think putting our money into that early intervention and prevention when a lot of areas kind of like Joe said don't have the kind of a county-wide or a kind of area-wide early intervention service really means that we saw before the pandemic that was reducing and keeping Lincolnshire's numbers lower than in other areas, and I think the hope is that as we move forward and as we strengthen those services that we can keep that reduction.
Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. You mentioned there's different eligibility criteria, which I appreciate on the first question. Surely there is a justification with LPFT to work out how we can, as close as possible, mimic each entrance criteria so that prevents, oh, you've gone into one, but you used to apply to that, but you don't now. And on the second question, and it sort of escaped me when I was making my notes, could the prevalence also be different societal attitude? I mean, when I was growing up, it was, well, boys don't cry. You don't show emotion, especially in my family background. My late father was a sergeant in Her Majesty's Royal Air Force, so there were certain things that you were expected to do that, if I use the term civilian child, you wouldn't even enter your thoughts. So is that also part of the prevalence that certainly males are, because it's prevalent, seems to be more prevalent in men, is my understanding, young men. They're more comfortable in reporting that they're struggling to, whether it's the GP or somebody in authority, rather than trying to deal with it themselves and bottling it up for a longer period of time, which is obviously going to do more damage.
If I come in first on the second question, and I'll leave Kevin to talk about the joined up pathways. I think in terms of the second question around prevalence and societal attitudes, I think what we do really well in terms of pulling together and through the service monitoring and needs assessment that we work closely with public health around trying to understand what the needs of young people are in Lincolnshire. But again, I guess there's something about our commitment to working with young children and young people early, universally through our public health services, but also with schools, and trying to unpick and offer information so that young people feel able to talk about the challenges that they're experiencing. And I think that is probably something that it has changed over time. We know that we want people to feel comfortable about talking about the anxiety and challenges that they feel, and a lot's gone into that. And certainly within schools, a lot's gone into helping schools to support children and young people with what is kind of normal feelings around things. So, I guess exam stress is one good example, and being really clear around the messages that is something that everybody experiences, and these are the things that you can try to help yourself with. And then if that's not working, these are the things you might want to ask for some help about. And then if that's not working, these are perhaps then some of the other services and things that are available. So trying to get need met at the right level. But I think we are encouraging people to talk more about their issues, which will be adding to the prevalence as well, I guess. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think that's something that runs through all of our service delivery across the piece, really, from universal right through to, you know, our CAMS provision is about meeting that need in the right places. And we've got some, you know, some really good services that are about supporting young people at the most challenging end of the spectrum, in terms of not that they're the most challenging, but their needs are most complex as well, and those cohorts that are, you know, adolescents that are experiencing all sorts of challenges again. So our provision goes across the board, which is a fortunate place to be in. But I think in terms of keeping on top of needs, it's important that we keep looking at what our needs look like going forward, and incorporating that into all of our work.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, it strikes me it's making sure you get the right level of support at the right time and quickly as well. Not having long delays in access to services such as psychological services. That always seems to be a little bit of an issue sometimes in CAMS and other services. Do we have any further questions, Councillor Gray?
No further questions, no.
Whilst we haven't...
Oh, sorry, Councillor Whittington has just raised his hand.
Councillor Whittington, over to you.
I was conscious I didn't answer the first question either. In relation to those pathways, I didn't know if Kev was going to come back on that. The joined up pathways across adults and, you know.
Yeah, and as I say, it is something that we want to work with adult services with. There's recently been a kind of a re-energisation in the mental health, learning disability and autism board. That's Sarah Connery, the CEO of Links Partnership Foundation Trust, has taken over leadership of that. And I think one of the things that's been discussed at that board is really working on those joined up pathways. What we don't want to do is create a kind of then an 18 to 25 service, if you like, that then has another cliff face. But we do want to kind of look at that, making sure that as we move across those services, that children and young people don't suddenly face kind of going out into the big wide world without any support when they need it, and certainly working with adult services to look at what their service offer is and how children and young people would best move into that service offer.
Thanks, Kevin. Councillor Whittington, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, just general comment, I think I support the idea of rolling up these two second 75s into one. I think it makes perfect sense for the reasons in the report. I just want to examine it a little bit further, sort of paragraphs 1.29 through to about 1.32. I kind of think it links in with what we've been talking about in terms of demand, and are we identifying all demand? Because it would indicate, sort of reading through sort of 1.29 or 1.3, the kind of pre-COVID pandemic, our sort of levels, our activity levels seem to be lower than the rest of the country, and post pandemic they're lower even, but the actual baseline has increased. And it then sort of goes on to sort of talk about sort of staffing issues. It's sort of been referred to that the referral rate seems to be increasing as well, and potentially that the number of suicides have increased to 6, which is, you know, obviously a real shocking thing to actually have 6 suicides. I mean, I think it was shocking to have 1, but to have 6. I'm just wondering. First question is, have we got enough resources here? I mean, is the reason that our activity seems to be lower than the rest of the country, even at a raised post-pandemic level, is that because we're doing something different to the rest of the country? I know we spend a lot of money in Lincolnshire around early intervention schemes, so I'm just wondering if that's what part that's playing. Second part is there any unidentified demand out there that may post-COVID be coming out, and we won't be seeing that in the rate increasing? And then do we think, you know, because it just referred to sort of pressures on staffing, have we got enough staff in there, and what sort of pressures have we got in terms of recruiting the staff that potentially we may need if demand is increasing? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
just to answer the first question about what we do in Lincolnshire, so we do invest quite a lot of money and also into services around that early intervention and prevention. And so this paper is also around Healthy Minds Lincolnshire CAMS and mental health support teams. But members may recall we brought recently the reports around Behaviour Outreach Support Service, which is also another service that is available to school-age pupils that does support those pupils whose distressed behaviours are putting their attendance or them at risk of exclusion. So that service does also provide support, and what we saw through that was what we're seeing through that is more boys than girls are being supported by that service, because boys are showing their emotions through their behaviour rather than perhaps the way that girls do. So we have that service in place, and that service also then contributes to that wider early intervention and prevention offer. And also we have within our early help team, we've got trained also workers within there that can also support children and young people's emotional well-being. So that's that service as well. So I think the way we do differently in Lincolnshire is that we've got Healthy Minds, we've got CAMS, MHSTs, but we've got that wider system of early intervention, because not all authorities commission a behaviour outreach support service, for example, and not all authorities have those those workers that are also trained to support emotional well-being within early help. So I think that does contribute.
Thank you. Just picking up from some of the other questions. Sorry, I'm going to quick manic if I turn around. So as Sarah said, Healthy Minds Lincolnshire was shown before the pandemic to be reducing demand on our more specialist services. Obviously, the hope is that is still going on, but obviously it's just a bit harder to see in the kind of recent data with the clouding of the information through the pandemic. I mean, we are lucky in Lincolnshire to have a good provider trust delivering these services, and they are only kind of one of a few in the country that are rated as outstanding for the CYP mental health services. And I think that's kind of obviously attending at kind of national and regional events with NHS England, that is recognised kind of across those wider groups. And that has helped in the past in terms of obviously attracting workforce and getting kind of the best workforce into Lincolnshire around that. But it is becoming more of a challenge as we've seen in recently, with kind of obviously areas pulling on the same resources, more investment kind of nationally into those services. It means that kind of everywhere has got money, but kind of are all pulling for the same workforce. So as I mentioned previously, we as well as the Healthy Minds Lincolnshire funding, there was another paper that went to Joint Commission Overview Group on the 24th of February that was about increasing the NHS investment into CAMS, specifically to try and improve those waiting times that we've got at the moment as a result of the pandemic, and kind of bring us up to where we think we need to be in terms of funding. So there's the CCG agreed the recommendation to aim to invest the service to the point where it needs to be to get back to a 4-week waiting time target from assessment to treatment for children and young people, and that was up to £1.2 million of additional funding. They've currently agreed just over £350,000 this year, but the rest will be subject to the CCG's kind of planning round in the new financial year. And obviously in terms of the pressures on staffing, there's a plan that's being developed by LPFT at the moment, which is kind of looking at how they can tap into previously untapped resources, such as kind of new graduates, psychology graduates, etc., that probably kind of haven't been tapped into before, and provide their own in-house training programs, more to encourage that workforce in. So hopefully kind of there is more investment coming in for specialist CAMs, and as we've already seen, for that early intervention as well, through the MHSTs and Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, and also looking at better options around kind of increasing that workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blackburn, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, it was more for me to understand. Do you think that we support the parents and carers? Is there enough available support? And how does this work with finances? Would that be a crossover with the adult services, or would the finances from the children's services, would that be in the budget to look after the parents and the carers as well, or would that cross over into adult services finances?
I can start. I think that's a really good question. Absolutely, parenting is a real key factor in supporting children and young people and their emotional well-being and mental health. And we know that if parents are anxious, that translates through their parenting to their children, and they pick up those cues. So in terms of where the funding sits, I think it is really complex, I think, in terms of all of the different services. And I think one of the real strengths within the County Council is that we do work in an integrated and a coordinated way. So across children's services, our early help services and our social care services work really closely with our commissioning team in terms of the delivery. So in the work that Sarah and Kev do with the commission contract with LPFT, we work with our service experts around seeing whether there's duplication. So Sarah mentioned we have a cohort of staff within our early help services employed by the council in children's services who are trained in CYIAPT, which is probably asked me to explain what that means, but I know Sarah can do that in a second, but it's the same training that our the mentally healthy schools staff have and Healthy Minds Lincolnshire have, so they can focus within colleagues around parenting, and you'll hear from Nikki a little bit later in a paper around some of the work that we're doing across early years, excuse me, and within our children's centres, excuse me, that very much links to that, if that makes sense.
Yes, so IAPT is increasing access to psychological therapies. And so it's a national programme that was introduced in order to provide some of that additional training for staff in those mental health and emotional wellbeing frontline services. I think in terms of also just around parent carers, so Healthy Minds Lincolnshire and mental health support teams, for example, they do also provide workshops for parent carers as well, which is primarily focused around supporting them to be able to support their children within the home, within their child's emotional wellbeing and mental health concerns, but it also it can include some of those strategies and tips, etc., are things that parent carers could replicate themselves for themselves within the home. And there is also a lot of resources as well that is available online through LPFT that are, some of them are pre-recorded workshops or video clips, etc., that do help both, that were actually developed through the pandemic to help both professionals, parent carers and young people. Yes, so they do, and some of those workshops that they offer are online workshops that it can be a group of different parent carers that come on board, that it's actually good for them to be able to see and talk about and see that they're having supporting similar concerns for their own children. So it is something that they do offer, but it is very much focused, as I say, around supporting their children within the home.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, do we have any further questions or comments?
No further questions.
Thank you. If I could perhaps just ask one or two questions. On page 23, 1.14, just looking at the sort of timetable, I was just interested in the fact that a whole year is classed as a training year. I don't know if any explanation could be given to members on that one. And the other one is, it was mentioned about the sort of inflexibility to some degree, I think, of one of the schemes. It's the mental health team scheme. Is there any scope for some flexibility that we might be able to bring in within the rules because of the rurality of Lincolnshire? Because that's always a problem, transposing things from an urban setting to a rural setting. Thank you.
I'll answer that one if that's okay. So the mental health support teams, as I say, is a nationally prescribed model, and so each team consists of four education mental health practitioners and 2 senior clinical leads. That's the model that so it's mandatory that every team has to have 4 education mental health practitioners. Those practitioners have to undertake a year of training. That's nationally prescribed, and everybody has to do that. And that is there's a range of universities across the country that bid to NHS England to run the training programmes. So that's statutory across the board. And then after their year of training, they then have to have a year of embedding that training into practice over the 2 years, so that then by the 3rd year they can become fully embedded. In terms of the inflexibility of the model, so there are those 3 core mandatory functions that are in the report that the MHSTs have to do. One around the direct intervention work, the other around supporting the senior mental health lead, and then the 3rd supporting that access, providing that advice guidance, and then supporting that access into more specialist services. We are looking at how, so through this single Section 75 agreement approach, we want to look at how we can make those best use of the resources between mental health support teams and Healthy Minds Lincolnshire. But in terms of those 3 core mandatory functions, there is no flexibility. That is, again, standard criteria. However, we have been lobbying NHS England around the strict criteria around the 8,000 children and young people that each team have to cover, because we have raised that on a number of occasions around that doesn't work for Lincolnshire. So when this programme first started, it very much started in the London borough areas, and so for some areas it only meant they only needed to cover 4 schools for them to be able to meet that 8,000 criteria. And of course in Lincolnshire, you know, as you'll see, in some of our teams, those teams are having to cover about 24 schools in order to reach that 8,000 criteria. They are reducing the criteria to 7,000 children and young people for the future MHSTs. It still isn't ideal for Lincolnshire, but we are continuing to sort of lobby around that and make it, you know, and I know that LPFT are and CCGs are, so that we are collectively lobbying the fact that that model doesn't work for those rural areas.
Great, thanks very much. It's good to hear that you're lobbying for the rural area, as it were. The only other observation I wanted to make, I was interested in Kevin's comment, I think it was, as regards the link with the psychology graduates from, I'm assuming, Lincoln University perhaps, and maybe others, but knowing that they have one of the larger departments teaching psychology, I think that's very interesting, because as we all know, the number of jobs in clinical psychology across the country are not massive, so if they can have an outlet for their interest, that sounds very interesting. Is that a link we have directly with Lincoln University, or is it just generally across, or LPFT have across it?
I think it's a relationship that LPFT have with the university, and I think it's something they're very keen to tap into, and start to look at kind of lifting some of those restrictions on how like I say where they'd normally recruit kind of in terms of qualifications.
Great, thank you. Joe, you wish to come in.
I was just going to say that we have got good links with Lincoln University, with the council and supporting LPFT, because there are a number of challenges around recruitment of key qualified posts, you know, social workers being one, but we work very closely with LPFT and try and sort of maximise those opportunities across our contracts.
Thanks very much. If there are no further questions or comments from members, I'll just recap on the actions that were required of us today, and that's that the committee is invited to, 1, consider the attached report and to determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report. and 2, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item. The 5 recommendations to the executive are set out on pages 18 and 19 of the agenda pack. Now, comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy to be passed on to the executive. And one comment I would like to make is I very much get the impression from the sort of the depth of discussion we've had this morning that perhaps an update later in the year on how this is progressing might be welcomed by members. I'm seeing nodding heads. So Tracy, if we could put that on the agenda, as it were, or for looking at later on in the year, I think that would be welcome. So I now propose that we support the recommendations. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Matthews, thank you very much. We will now vote on this item. You're voting whether you support the recommendations to the executive and agree to provide the additional comments to the executive. So all those in favour, please show your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. Those recommendations are supported and will go forward. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to item 6, school standards and recovery. This item provides an update regarding the standards within the sector-led system and the recovery response following the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to welcome Matt Spores, Head of Service for School Standards, and Nikki Myers, Interim Head of Service for Early Years, who will be presenting the report. So it's over to you, Matt and Nikki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll be bringing the early years perspective, then I'll pass over to Matt because it's a joint paper. So as of March 2021, 97% of Lincolnshire's early years settings were judged good or better compared to the national of 96%. Scheduled Ofsted inspections in early years and childcare providers were cancelled at the start of the pandemic and routine inspections did not take place. Ofsted carried out interim visits to early years and childcare providers from the 28th of September to 21st of December 2020 for those providers with less than good outcome at their previous inspections. These visits did not result in any change in any Ofsted grades. Ofsted resumed their routine inspections in April 2021 and have focused their visits on those providers who have yet to have their first inspection and those who have a less than good inspection outcome. Since that date, there have been 45 inspections of early years and childcare providers in Lincolnshire and 39 have been judged as good or met where there were no early years children on site. 4 have been judged as requires improvement and 1 judged as inadequate. Good level of development is used as the key measure to judge outcomes for children at the end of the foundation stage. Children are defined as having reached a good level of development at the end of the early years foundation stage if they achieve at least the expected level in the early learning goals in the prime areas of learning, which are personal, social and emotional development, physical development and communication and language, and some areas of mathematics and literacy. The good level of development in Lincolnshire was 69.6% in 2019 compared to 69.1% in 2018. This is lower than pupils in the East Midlands, which was 70.3, and that of the statistical neighbours, which was 71.1. National has increased to 71.8 in 2019. The percentage of children achieving a good level of development has increased by 0.5% for Lincolnshire since 2018 and has dropped below national average at 2.2%. Boston and East Lindsey saw the greatest increase in the good level of development in 2019. Boston's good level of development increased from 62.2 in 2018 to 65.5 in 2019. East Lindsey's good level of development rose from 65.8 in 2018 to 68.9 in 2019. Lincoln's good level of development increased by just 0.4% to 66.5%, whilst West Lindsey and South Holland's good level of development remained the same. North Kesteven and South Kesteven's good level of development both decreased from 2018 to 2019, with South Kesteven having the biggest decrease by 1.6%. Boston and South Holland remain the lowest performing districts for good level of development. The Lincolnshire inequality gap, the difference between the lowest performing 20% of pupils and their peers, is narrower than the East Midlands in achievement across all early learning goals compared to the national target. Early years and childcare team, our team has refocused their support for early years and childcare providers based on recovery following the easing of the COVID pandemic restrictions, in particular to ensure providers are able to maintain compliance with early years foundation safeguarding welfare and related requirements, yet enable children to have a maximum opportunity to learn and develop. In many cases, the requirements limited the way providers organise their provision, which may have restricted children's development, and providers will need have needed support to consider how to reorganise their environments. Following the impact of the pandemic and the concern that quality may drop in absence of external support, our team has focused support on those most likely to be inspected through bespoke packages for those with less than good inspection. Currently, that's 9 providers, and those awaiting the first inspection, which is currently 38 group providers and 52 childminders. And support for new managers across the county, which we currently have 6 new managers in provision. A report by Ofsted last year outlined the impact on children and early years provision. As a result, all providers are being offered a development visit around the requirements of the EYFS to ensure providers are confident they are compliant and offering a quality provision. As well as the targeted support above, EYCC also provide a universal offer, which consists of termly leadership and management briefings, drop-in sessions for all early years providers, termly SENCO networks, early years designated safeguard lead networks, termly partnership meetings, early years training brochure, which includes all the training that we offer across the county, and self-referral process for all the providers. The next publication of the EYFS profile outcomes is expected in the autumn term of this year, 2022. This will be following the submission of data in summer 2022. This will be the first year of a new assessment process at the end of the foundation stage, with new early learning goals and no local authority moderation, following the publication of the revised statutory early years foundation stage framework. Our team has delivered county-wide training to schools, early years providers and professionals who work with children in early years to ensure there is confidence in the new guidance. Locality early years colleagues focus their support for providers to meet the needs of children who are vulnerable through targeted work and universal advice and guidance on the SEND Code of Practice and the graduated approach. We've also, throughout the pandemic, we've also maintained our 48 children's centres have been open throughout the pandemic across the county, and we've prioritised antenatal visits and priority health visiting visits. We've now back in children's centres. We're now back to a pre-COVID. All the centres offer early learning and development opportunities. All the sessions have been face-to-face since September last year, and we've got a good response from parents, and attendance is back to where it was pre-COVID in the centres. I'll pass over to my colleague Matt.
Thanks, Nikki. So just to pick up then in terms of primary and secondary school performance, members will be aware that examinations and statutory testing was paused during 2020-2021. So the data that you will have received in the pack is data that you will have received previously and reflects the 2019 performance of schools in the county. Having said that, Ofsted also suspended its inspection programme for schools, but did pick it up again briefly through the pandemic and then again in the autumn term. And just a slight update from the information that you've got in your report, the average that we currently have in terms of good or better schools in Lincolnshire from the end of December rather than the end of November increased to 84.1%. Slightly up from the 83.9%, and the national, the statistical neighbours actually dropped to 83.9%. So we did increase slightly above our statistical neighbours, although we are still below national in terms of the number of schools which are judged to be good or outstanding. In terms of just that picture, which again you'll have seen the data before, we are the lowest performing districts at all key stages are Boston and City of Lincoln. The highest performing are North Kesteven and South Kesteven, and the most improved districts are South Holland and East Lindsey. At Key Stage 4, a slight exception to that in that East Lindsey performs less well than other districts, and West Lindsey actually performs quite highly relative to other districts at Key Stage 4. Through the pandemic, we've supported schools as an education team through the work of the education locality leads in order to support schools to access the range of government funded initiatives which are listed there in the report, such as the early language intervention, the catch-up premium, the COVID recovery premium, national tutoring programme, and the early career framework, which has been touched on already, and also the 16 to 19 tuition fund. Coming out of the pandemic, schools have now been supported to work with the Teaching School Hub. The Teaching School Hub has replaced the 7 teaching schools which we had in the local authority, and their contracts ceased at the end of August. Teaching schools were contracted through the DFE to provide centres of excellence that schools could tap into and also provide professional development. The DFE has consolidated that into one teaching school hub in each authority area, and that for Lincolnshire is based at Equate School, which is in Lincoln, which is run by the Lead Multi-Academy Trust. So we're working very much in partnership with the Teaching School Hub to implement CPD and programmes of support for schools so that they can come out of the pandemic stronger and support the pupils more efficiently. We also are working very much with the Lincolnshire Learning Partnership Board, which as members I think will have been briefed on before, is the elected group of representatives from the school sector who we work closely with so that they gather intelligence from us and from schools, and we work with them on where we can commission the best support and projects for the sector so that the sector itself, as been alluded to in the title, is a sector-led model of school improvement. We are also now, which isn't in the report because it's quite new news, members will be aware that the government has announced that Lincolnshire is now an education investment area through the Levelling Up White Paper, which means that there will be additional investment coming into the authority to support schools. We have no detail on that. Members may wish to ask questions, but we have very few answers at the moment. But as we know at the moment, there is a view that there will be retention payments for science, technology, engineering and mathematics and computing colleagues to encourage them to stay in schools in our area, and also indeed to provide programmes of training and support, particularly around Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4, in order to get better outcomes there. And the government's target for these areas is 90% for reading, writing and mathematics at Key Stage 2. They haven't yet set a target for Progress 8 at Key Stage 4. But it was our Key Stage 2 reading, writing and mathematics results and our Key Stage 4 Progress 8 which has triggered the DFE to designate us as an education improvement area, because both of those measures we are lower than national over time, and therefore that has meant that we've been designated that area. And so we await the education white paper, which is due shortly. Mr. Chair is the word used by the DFE, and we don't quite know what shortly means. And equally, we may well find in that education white paper that local authorities are allowed, if not encouraged, to form their own multi-academy trusts, which, if that happens, I'm sure there'll be another paper coming to members hot on the heels of that. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. And Nikki, do we have any questions?
Councillor Matthews.
Councillor Matthews.
Several things. Speaking as an old-fashioned schools inspector, I'm really pleased to see that our locality leads are visiting schools once a term to check on performance. I'm actually really pleased we've been designated as an improvement area because our performance in English and Maths has been bad, and we've not been able to respond to it because of the fact that those schools are academies. And I was really interested in your last comment. I'm going, LA Multi-Academy Trust may be allowed. Hallelujah. Because here we have far too many small academy trusts soaking money out with without reciprocal performance. But the bit I really want to speak about is English as additional language. Our two low performing areas are Lincoln and Boston, lower performing areas, and you talk about EAL as a significant factor at Key Stage 4, but there's no reference to EAL in early years. The early years support has been on safeguarding and things like that. And it strikes me that in Boston particularly, we have a language issue almost invariably within our early years settings. And I wonder what we're doing in understanding that we know it's there. What are we doing about it, please?
For the early years, we do have a commission contract that supports throughout children's centres, support parents to access the right early year setting or the right children's centre. So we do commission quite a substantial contract. That is being reviewed, and it's looking likely to extend. It is in the Boston and Lincoln area currently, but we are finding other parts of the county, such as South Kesteven, are needing some support with English as additional language. So we have got that contract that is in place.
Can in future we have some comment on that then? Because if it's in place and we're still having these fundamental problems, it maybe isn't working properly.
I was just going to say, Councillor Matthews, the commissioning for the early years contract will be coming here fairly shortly. We've done quite an in-depth needs assessment in relation to the communities of Lincolnshire and when that contract was last commissioned, and that piece of work was done in 2017. It won't be a surprise to anybody here that the population changes have increased even more significantly in terms of those families with English as a second language, both in Boston and in South Holland and in Lincoln, but also in other parts of the council. There's a relook and a refresh of what we want that service to do, and you will get that in quite a bit of detail shortly.
Thanks very much. That's Joe. Are you happy with that, Councillor Matthews? Yes.
Yes, I am. I mean, it's a very well-written report, but it doesn't, it's talking about recovery, but it doesn't seem to be focusing on the areas sufficiently that we need to refocus on. And what we just heard is that we are refocusing on those areas. So good, thank you.
Councillor Clark, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. The item follows on well to the previous item we had. City of Lincoln and Boston are both low performance and mental health issues. Being a governor of a school in Lincoln, 16% of the children attending that school are being covered by SEND, and it's not being decreased. Are funds being directed into these two areas, and what is the overall plan of the council to address these two particular areas? Thank you.
If I start, I know the experts on this particular area and this question are not necessarily in the room. That's not to say that Matt and I won't be able to answer that between us. But you're absolutely right. I think in terms of early EHCPs and SEND, there is a huge focus within the council around our approach to supporting those children and those needs via the high needs transformation work that Martin Smith leads on. I know that's come here in various guises before and will be coming again. I'm looking at Tracy and she's nodding, which will give you a really detailed picture in terms of the work that we're doing. And I think in terms of following a similar theme, really, I think that the key is around our various different support services working together to meet need early, together with schools, so that schools are identifying need, using the resources that they have within their schools, knowing when to get extra support in, if that makes sense, and considering how we meet those needs across our collective services. I don't know, Matt, if you want to add anything specific in relation to the question.
Only just to say that particularly at Key Stage 4, performance of our SEND pupils is not significantly lower, and in some areas it's actually above national. So in terms of children with SEND, we do relatively well with SEND, but we do see that certain schools with higher proportions of children with SEND do have capacity problems in terms of meeting their needs. And obviously with the academy schools versus the maintained schools, that adds another dimension to what we as an authority can physically do in terms of boots on the ground. But I know, as Joe said, there will be other colleagues that will be providing papers to the committee about SEND and the strategy for SEND.
think it also really recognises and demonstrates the needs of our early years service in terms of meeting need early, identifying need antenatally, and the work that Nick is leading on across the system really is about very much that, joining up all of our ingredients, if you like, across the system and making sure they're working together the most effectively so that we are picking up need even before babies are born, right through our really early years and health visiting services through to children starting in settings and at school and doing that. And I think that's, again, one of the advantages of being so integrated. But yeah, very good question.
And just again, just to follow on from that, what we see is that many of our SEND children also fall into the category of disadvantaged children, that families would be in receipt of pupil premium funding, or the schools will be, for those children. And so what's quite difficult to unpick sometimes is whether it's the disadvantage which is leading to challenges, or whether it's the special educational need that the child may have. But what we do see is that some of our most deprived areas also are where we see the weakest performance in the schools. And I think it's a well-established correlation that disadvantaged pupils and disadvantaged areas tend to have the lowest performance in school and pupil outcomes.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll take, if I've got 2 points, and I'll go backwards based on the timely intervention and the comment from Councillor Clark. Chairman, you will know my concerns around SEN education and the comments I gave you, so I won't reiterate them, but it merely reiterates those concerns I have and doesn't put them to bed in any great manner. What we do around that is very difficult because, as already been alluded to, the complexity of SEN will vary from child to child, which will have implications on educational attainment in some cases. It will have less in some, and it will be a complete hindrance in others. So it's very difficult to capture that in analytical terms. But what is very clear from the report is there is a monumental gap between SEN and non-SEN children, and whether officers are able to do this, it would be helpful if we can drill down as to why that is. Is it due to the severity of their special educational need, that they're not able to process things or information that they need to process to attain those qualifications, or is it actually a issue of resource and how they're taught? I know that's probably very difficult to drill down into, I appreciate. My second point, Chairman, and this is a long-standing point, and this is not a swipe at any individual entity in Lincolnshire, this is a national problem, and that is the gulf between girls and boys. And we are always hearing this whenever the GCSE results, A-level results, whatever it is, come out. The gulf never seems to get any lower. My question, and this is again, is not to swipe anybody here, is, and this is something I don't know if we're able to do, Chairman, as politicians, what is actually being done to actually do anything about this? Because it's all well and good. It can't just be because boys think differently. There's got to be something else that's in the pipeline. So are they not being, is their way of thinking not being accounted for when they're being taught? Do they need to be taught in a different way to get attained in the same way as girls? There's something more, and we can't just keep saying, oh, it's because boys think differently, because to me that's a cop-out. Yet you will have some who, just as you would in girls, who are difficult students, let me put it like that, who are difficult to teach, who don't want to learn. But that won't be all of them, and I wouldn't say that's a majority of them either. And I think we need to do what we can at a local and national level to see what we can do about closing that gulf, because it's been going on for far too long, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, did you want to come in?
Just for Martin's benefit, because he's entered the room at the perfect moment, really, in terms of questions around the gap between SEN and non-SEN. And I just referenced earlier to a question earlier around the high needs transformation work that we're doing as a council that will be coming here with updates. And then I think you're here for the second question around the gap between boys and girls. And I don't know if Matt's wanting to come in.
So just to give Martin time to think, in terms of SEN, and I'm sure Martin will come back on this in terms of the strategy, but one of the challenges is that, as you've already mentioned, is the range of special educational need that schools have. And I think one of the things that we could bring back to the committee is a more detailed analysis of the different categorisations of SEN and how those young people perform. And obviously we have children with SEN in mainstream settings as opposed to children in special school settings. And so again, that analysis I think we could bring to you. In terms of the boys and girls, one of the things we're supporting schools with to which could potentially address that is working very hard on new curriculum models, how the curriculum pathways to post-16 and into the world of work and apprenticeships can support and encourage the aspirations, particularly of young white British males, which is our key underperforming group, and equally we're there linking with our growth and place directorate in terms of looking at how our broader strategy of the world of work can support schools in tailoring their curriculums to get an aspirational and clear pathway for young people to actually, it is worth me paying attention at school because I'm going to get something out of it and go on and get a good job. So we do acknowledge it, and we are working with schools to try and support them.
Thanks, Matt. I think the committee would welcome your suggestion of bringing something forward on what you just said about the attainment and improving the attainment. I think that'd be very welcome. Could I just mention that the education investment area topic is scheduled at the moment to be on our July agenda. Obviously, it's probably a movable feast, but fingers crossed we'll be able to have a proper discussion and report on that in July, unless something changes. So that's just for your information, members. Councillor Gray, do we have any further questions?
Nobody indicating no.
Thank you. Just one question I want to ask. We get an awful lot of data coming before this committee and all committees, and we have comparators between Lincolnshire, the East Midlands and national, and in some cases we have it with sort of what peer authorities in similar areas, shire authorities. I notice, unless I've missed it, in this report we don't have much against shire authorities. I don't know whether that's not something we do. It's just wondering, because sometimes we do have sets of comparators.
The data that we tend to use is our statistical neighbours, which are the ones with similar demographics and similar issues. There is a measure against other selective area authorities, which is essentially Buckinghamshire and Kent, which compare us to those. We are routinely much lower in terms of attainment and progress than those two particular authorities, but they have slightly different models of selection than we do in Lincolnshire. So it's not, well, I would suggest it's not a particularly fair comparison.
Fine, thanks very much. Councillor Whittington, did you indicate the question?
So I think it's been up from the general conversation that I think quite a few councillors have sort of raised. And they definitely, and I'm just sort of looking at sort of those sort of areas that are sort of below in Lincolnshire that are performing worse than those that are performing better. And I'm almost guessing that if you could superimpose those over areas of deprivation, you'd probably find that areas sort of like Boston and Lincoln, which seem to be the worst performing at the moment, have probably got some of the highest levels of deprivation. If you sort of then look at the best performing NK and SK, I mean, obviously you can't say there's no deprivation in those two areas, but I imagine it's probably a lot less. So I'm just interested potentially, we're sort of talking about SEND, and I think that's really important. But to me, there just seems to be, a link between deprivation, SEND, educational attainment. So I'm just wondering if possible, when we're sort of looking at this paper that's going to come back, that possibly we add sort of deprivation in as one of the factors as well, just to try and tease out what that link actually is. And then also, interesting to note the South Holland and East Lindsey seem to be the best improved, and certainly along East Lindsey, along the coast. I know we've got some quite deprived areas along the East Coast, so I'm just wondering what perhaps Boston and Lincoln areas might be able to learn from East Lindsey, South Holland, and how they seem to be addressing the issue. But I certainly think we've got to include deprivation in the picture as well. Thanks.
Just to say that is absolutely a correlation that we do see. We can bring back some more statistical analysis on that should you wish it. But there certainly is a correlation there. We see that our schools in our most deprived wards tend to struggle with, particularly with progress with young people. So yes, we certainly see that.
Councillor Matthews.
Could we also look at another factor, which is recruitment and retention of teaching staff in these particular areas? Because I know it's extremely difficult in challenging circumstances, in challenging schools, to recruit the sort of staff that will bring the turnaround. And whilst we understand that's the case, we probably need to be thinking about what we can do about it.
That is a challenging thing. I mean, we certainly see it. Obviously, one of the aspirations of the education investment area is retention payments for colleagues in the STEM, the science, technology, education and maths computing arena for retention, but recruitment is a challenge. I think, Martin, you can...
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thank you, Councillor Matthews, for that question. I think we have plenty of anecdotal and localised knowledge of challenges, etc. I think being able to prove and articulate that through data is quite difficult now due to the construct. Who's the employer, academies, multi-academy trusts, etc. I think what's interesting, particularly more recently, there seems to have been a shift. So I'm certainly aware of 3 or 4 schools in that East Coast who have been recently visited by Ofsted and been successful, who are now seeing the interest in vacancies and opportunities in those schools being much more attractive. And so we are hearing of increased numbers to positions, which is welcome news for teaching and leadership. But we wouldn't be able to articulate an exact picture for you, but we can certainly maybe raise it at our CEO network meeting and get some feedback for you to consider there.
I think it would be good, Martin. You missed my earlier comment about the importance of us local leads going into schools every day. Really us starting to create some pressure on performance, which we haven't been able to do, and then possibly other changes that your colleague referred to about the ability of LA to take on schools. So this is not a criticism or a challenge of what we're doing. It is about where we probably need to press the lever a bit harder to go and support that. And I recognise that you can't get the data, and it's really nice that we've got 4 good stories, but actually it is a nationwide problem, and we might need to dip our hands in our pockets and find a benefit to bring people here. But it's not just in education, it's in health as well. Thanks.
I think that's a really helpful clarification, so thank you for that. I think it's not only the role of the local authority within the education investment area, it is the function of the regional schools commissioner who have that oversight and responsibility, and I think it's a collective piece of work of beginning to support, challenge, monitor and ramp up that pressure for those better outcomes. I think we've had good success to date with a number of our schools, but I think to achieve the ambition or the mission of the education investment area, it needs to be using all of the levers to champion those outcomes. So, you know, I would agree with that completely.
Thanks very much, Martin. Oh, Councillor Whittington, you have a question?
So it's just to come back on something that Councillor Matthews says, because both of us are involved with health scrutiny. And recently we did get some papers on health, especially health for children, and there possibly, as well as deprivation and SEND, there probably is a link to health as well, because certainly some of those figures that we got back for Boston, East Coast and parts of Lincoln were really quite alarming in terms of children's health and also in terms of the entities care as well. And I just think there's obviously a link between it all. Thanks.
Thank you. I think so many things are interlinked, aren't they? We all agree on that. Councillor Smith, sorry I omitted you earlier.
No, it's quite all right, Chairman. Going back to what Matt said, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Matt, that actually it's working class white males that seem to be the lowest performing, and it would be helpful if we had some data from that, because I may have missed it in the report, but if it's there, I apologise. If it's not, we could really do with what we're doing around that cohort, because for a very long time they were the forgotten. Believe it, ironically, they were the forgotten cohort that was struggling, and it's only been very recently, in the last sort of 2 years, through campaigns from Ben Bradley and people like him in Westminster, that it's been brought sort of up to the fore. So it'd be really helpful if we could have some data, either data or evidence or something to say what we're doing for this class, because and this group of people, because for too long I think they've sort of been left to deal with it by themselves and been struggling.
Councillor Matthews, you had a question.
I just want to add Councillor Smith has raised a very good point, but our white British performance is masked by the fact that we have a selective system here. And I would ask that we strip out the grammar school performance of white British and look at the academies that are not selective of white British, because I think that then you'll find the disparity against national performance is worse than it's reflected as a total percentage, if you like. And that's just the nature of our problem. But it means that we've got good white British education for males and for females in our grammar school system, excellent. But inside the non-selective system, it's worse than national. And I'm just asking that we split that data out as well.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions, Councillor Gray?
No further questions.
Thank you, thank you. Well, the actions required of us on this particular item was to review and comment on the issues and information contained in the report, and I think we've had a pretty thorough discussion on this, and some important issues have been raised. I therefore propose that the committee has reviewed the report and is satisfied with the recovery response and the actions being undertaken following the COVID-19 pandemic. We've mentioned that we've got an agenda item in July in specific reference to education investment areas, which hopefully will be informative when that comes on. So can I please ask you to raise your hand if you agree with my proposal? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Can I suggest then, as I indicated earlier, we have our 10-minute comfort break, and I suggest we resume at 20 to 12 according to our computer clocks and not the chamber clock. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back to the second part of this morning's meeting, and we're moving on to agenda item number 7, which is service level performance against the corporate performance framework for quarter 3. This item sets out the quarter 3 performance for the tier 2 service level performance measures in relation to children's services that are above or below the target range. And I'd like to invite Joe Kavanagh, Assistant Director Early Help, to present the report. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. I don't intend to say too much. I'm sure there'll be some questions, but I think these are performance measures that you're all relatively well familiar with. If I start with the 2 that didn't meet their target, and the first one is around our children in care rate, you can see from the report that although our rate per 10,000 children is 48.8, which is above our target of 46, we do still perform really, really strongly when compared to the national average and our significant, our statistical neighbours who are performing at 67 and 63.4. What I would say, and it won't come as any surprise to those of you in the room, that our children in care numbers is something that is an absolute priority for us. We know that wherever possible, where it's safe and appropriate to do so, children do best within their family settings. We invest really heavily into our edge of care services and our early help services, as you know, to prevent escalation of needs that would result in children coming into care. Also, in terms of, you'll see from the report, there is the National Transfer Scheme and the expectation that Lincolnshire will take a maximum of 103 children. That is having a little impact on the numbers, but what I will say, we do a regular analysis of our cohort of children in care, and you will be assured to hear that the majority of children coming into care are those under 1. They are our children that are the most vulnerable, who are not in a position to protect themselves from harm, and they are the children that are likely to exit from care into adoption and other special guardianship arrangements. So just to reassure on that point. So we are not seeing increases in children in their sort of early teenage years coming into care because of complexities, some of which is about the pandemic. We are seeing that our edge of care services are working well with those families to stop them from coming into care. In relation to 16 and 17-year-old children in care participating in learning, again, I have spoken here previously around the pilot that the virtual school has had in terms of having some pupil premium money specifically for this cohort of young people in a way that they haven't previously. There is lots of work being done, and I know that Andy Morris, our corporate parenting manager, is reporting through the corporate parenting panel on the in-depth work that's been undone with that cohort of young people. As you can imagine, these are children and young people that have experienced the most difficulty. They have a number of different vulnerabilities, and a lot of the work that Andy is doing with our leaving care service, with our own workforce and with the virtual school is around raising aspiration, ensuring that all of our workforce and our partners that work and support this cohort are really focused on raising the aspiration of those young people, looking at very small steps, because for some of this cohort, the trauma that they've experienced and the instability they experience has an impact on their ability to access services to support them with gaining education, training and employment. But it absolutely is also the way out of some of those complexities, and so needs to be an absolute priority for that cohort of young people. There are a number of measures in which we are doing really well and continue to do really well, and there are still the 2 measures of which yet we're still unable to report on. So that's all I was going to say, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Matthews.
The reason I ask so many questions is because so much of my work I don't understand, but I have a vague idea of what's going on here. It's really nice to think, oh, I understand. My question is about the children in care and about the National Transfer Scheme, because, as you quite rightly said, under the corporate parent scrutiny panel, we ask questions about the alleged high number of 16 and 17-year-old males who were in our care homes. And the answer I got back was, well, they're not our children. They are placed with us from different authorities. So and then you've gone on to say that actually most of our in-house placements come from of young children. Can someone just tell me a little bit of the story of age against internal and external? Because and then the other thing was that they don't count as Lincolnshire NEETs apparently, because they're not placed in Lincolnshire and they might be in programmes. This was the question that was answer that was coming back from corporate parenting to the similar question. So I'm a bit, when having said I was confident to ask questions, I'm now even more confused about this distinction. Are they Lincolnshire children or not? Do they count on our statistics or not? And what's the actual breakdown through ages of 0 to 18 in our children in care? Thank you.
I will try my best. I won't be able to give you the answer on absolutely all of this, but I do agree it is confusing. So if they are our Lincolnshire children in care and our Lincolnshire care leavers, then they are absolutely our children and our young people, and they will count in our statistics in relation to all of the performance measures that we report. So there are high numbers of children placed in Lincolnshire by other local authorities. So in some of our private residential homes, in some of our private fostering providers who don't count as Lincolnshire children in care and wouldn't count in our performance statistics, but do count for other services such as health delivery. They will be attending our schools, and from a youth offending point of view, if they have offended and are on a court order, they will also count for them, if that makes sense. So it is a little bit confusing as to where the cohorts of different young people appear, if that makes sense. In terms of the transfer scheme, we are seeing some increase in numbers, but we are not seeing that have a significant impact in our overall rate of children in care and of care leavers. The children that are placed in terms of unaccompanied asylum seekers, for example, tend to do incredibly well in terms of education, training and employment, and our provider Locate, which happens to be based in Peterborough, very deliberately, because there are good resources around that provision. They are very well focused on education, training and employment of that cohort and tend to do well. So in terms of the numbers and ages within our cohort, we do dig into that on a regular basis, and we are always looking and are interested, as you would imagine, on why our numbers are increasing. So when I talked about the numbers increasing and us digging into that, what we are seeing is that there are a higher number of children under 1 entering care, rather than 15 and 16-year-olds entering care, making that difference to the overall cohort. There are obviously a breakdown of the ages of children within that cohort who will have come into care at a particular age and are then sort of staying in care, if that makes sense. So I think that the fact that there are more children coming into care who are under 1 is a good thing, in a sense that it reassures us that we are keeping that cohort of children safe. You will know nationally there has been a lot of concern around injuries to babies and under 1s, particularly during the most restricted parts of the COVID pandemic, when, if you like, families were not seeing families and parents were parenting children alone, without access to even being able to go for a coffee with a friend, and all of the other things that we all lived through. There were some concerns around increasing injuries to that cohort. We haven't seen that in Lincolnshire, but we continue to look at that cohort of children coming into our services to assure ourselves. I guess the other important link with that cohort of under 1s is that we haven't seen in Lincolnshire that our health visitors have not been drawn off to deliver other acute services in ways which they have across the country. So we have our health visiting, as you know, are in-sourced to the council, employed by the council, and we have kept them delivering health visiting services throughout the pandemic, unlike in other parts of the country where they've perhaps been deployed into acute services and vaccinations, etc., etc. So that's another thing that's helped to keep that cohort of children safe. sorry if I'm answering what you wanted, Councillor Matthews. I just wanted
You
to
are,
check in.
that's absolutely fine. What you're saying is it's muddy water.
It is, and I think...
And I don't want to make a knee-jerk reaction about this underperformance because I don't understand all the factors. I'm interested in one other thing about this muddy water, though. We've talked about Boston and Lincoln, and Boston has a very high Eastern European population, and I think we've mentioned earlier that they probably don't tend to place children into the care system. So is there a geographical pattern to this children in care and entry into care? And actually, might this be one of the wonderful good things about Boston and Lincoln, that it's a low entry into care, or have I read that wrong?
I don't think there are any disparities across the county around children coming into care or not by geographical location that causes us any worry. There are lots of different factors, I guess, in terms of there are some children that will have a bit of a move through our system, so we'll be working with them at an early help level. We might then not be able to meet need and need a social worker, so they'll be managed at child in need, and then perhaps escalate into child protection, and then maybe some of those children who continue to be at risk and whose parents can't change in a way that we would want them to, or as quickly as we'd want them to, that come into the care system. There are other children that come straight into the care system because of a significant event, and so it's very difficult to sort of pick through that. But I don't think we are seeing that Lincoln is doing better or worse, or Boston's doing better or worse. That there are different things that play in different areas, if that makes sense. I guess the reason I focus on the under ones is because they also exit care. So, in terms of those under ones are much more likely, or very, will be adopted, will be there'll be kinship arrangements, so special guardianship orders, and once the court makes an adoption order or a special guardianship order, they stop being children in care. So they come in and exit, if that makes sense. So go out of the cohort, as opposed to if we were seeing greater numbers of 9, 10 and 11-year-olds coming into care, they're likely to remain in the care system and be fostered and other things, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks very much, Joe. Councillor Whittington, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's around the two sort of where we're not achieving target, and both impact obviously on children in care. And I know we've kind of said this during the pandemic, more children went into care, and that at some point the numbers may start to stabilise or may start to go down. I know, because I just want to sort of try to understand. Obviously, we pre-COVID we were kind of we had a rough plateau of where we were. There were a few ups and downs. And obviously, we had this spike during COVID. And I'm just wondering now, are we starting to see a drop down again? But are we actually going to be seeing a new baseline appearing post-COVID, which may be higher than pre-COVID? And I'm just wondering potentially, do we understand why, and what are the key drivers behind this? Because I'm just trying. I think it's kind of linked to the previous discussion we had about this sort of link between deprivation and problems that children have in education. I'm just wondering if COVID kind of exacerbated some of those issues in terms of tensions within families, which may have led to increased family breakdown. So just sort of understanding that. And then in terms of the children 16 to 17 care leavers not in education and training, again, what was the impact on COVID on that? Because I'm guessing that it potentially may have been harder for those children during COVID to actually access education. And again, are we seeing the numbers coming down, or are we seeing perhaps a new baseline and a new plateau appearing? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Just in relation to the first question, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that's our absolute focus. I think there are lots of different factors at play, and I think we talk here a lot about the fact that we are a very well integrated children's service, and I feel very blessed to be working in Lincolnshire, where we have such strong early help support in place. So in Lincolnshire, we've always had very high numbers of children that are supported through a team around the child, where they don't have a social worker, where schools will be our lead professional, and they are meeting needs really early. We have a reasonably large cohort of children in need, so those children whose needs can't be met at that earlier stage, but who need a social worker, so are coming into statutory services, but we work in a supportive way with the family. And again, we have relatively low numbers of children on a child protection plan, and our rate and our figures around children in care, although higher than we would like it to be, is still much lower than you know, the national average and our statistical neighbours. And that's the way that we want it to stay. I think that the way that the proportions of children across those different plans is something that we drill down to on a regular basis to make sure that the work that we're doing with children, wherever they are and wherever their needs are being met, is still working. So I think there are some things around our actual numbers of children in care have gone up, and our rate is reflected in that. It's gone up very slightly. I think our concern is that is as much about keeping that number low for all the reasons that I've talked through, but also making sure that we're keeping children safe. So, you know, it's a fine balance, because, you know, if children need to come into care because they're not safe, they come into care, whether that tips us over the numbers that we would want or not. It's about keeping children safe. I think the impact of the pandemic has been a challenge, and we know nationally that the numbers of children in care nationally have gone up significantly, and most other areas of the country have experienced increases that are much bigger than ours. They didn't necessarily come from the place that we were at pre-pandemic. And I think there are a number of national focuses, one being, for example, a real focus of the Department for Education on school attendance for children who have a social worker. So there is a concern that if you are not going to school, you won't be surprised to hear that has huge impacts on all sorts of things. From a very basic point of view, you've not got other professionals with sight on those children, you're not learning, you're not benefiting from social interactions, etc. You're also perhaps not in a routine, you might not be getting up, you might be staying late, the impact on relationships at home is there, etc. And that can result in increased numbers of children coming into care if you follow that through. So it is something that we are continually looking at to make sure that we are doing all we can in all the right places to enable children to stay living at home. And I'm sorry, Councillor Matthews, I've forgotten your second question now.
It's okay, Joe. I think one of the points that you did say there was that the important role that the schools were playing pre-COVID in team around the child. Because I'm guessing that once that's gone and children aren't going to school, the ability for schools to be involved in that process is obviously going to be greatly reduced, because they're not having as easy access and seeing the children as they were before. But my second question was around children not in education, our children in care, not in educational training, and just again, just try to understand some impact of potentially trying to understand some of the issues that they were facing during COVID. And I'm thinking again about access in, and it may be related to, as you've already alluded to, a less structured environment, possibly inability to access. I'm thinking about maybe if you haven't got the technology to do. And again, just to try to understand some of those issues and whether we think we're at a new plateau, or if we're going to return to something similar to pre-COVID. Thanks.
Yeah, again, it is difficult. I think that the numbers that are not participating in learning and training, etc., is relatively low, and it is a changing picture on an individual young person level. So there are always issues that impact on individual children that impact on that. I think in terms of the work that we're doing collectively and the work that Andy's doing is really bringing a focus on aspiration and raising aspiration, and instead of it being the last thing to consider for a young person that is experiencing difficulties around their accommodation maybe, or relationships with family, of which many of them have those challenges, sometimes it can seem that we will focus on this first or that first, and actually there needs to be an absolute focus on raising aspiration, getting young people into training, education and employment, because that will resolve some of the other challenges as well, or certainly not make any of that any worse. So I think there's been something around workforce development and joining up the delivery that we have with Bernardo's, with our own social workers, with our accommodation providers, and the virtual school have kind of been able to knit some of that together, if that makes sense. I had the real privilege to go out last Friday with Andy to visit a number of the accommodation providers that we've got across Lincoln itself in terms of supporting some of our most vulnerable care leavers, and it was really wonderful to see how well a number of those are doing in terms of attending, provision, working towards apprenticeships, etc. And they have been impacted in the same way lots of other young people were around. For them, education stopped. I spoke to one young person who was about to be doing a GCSEs in year 11 when the pandemic first hit, and she talked about the impact that had. So we are seeing some of those challenges that have impacted on everyone, but I think what Andy is trying to do along with others is knit all of the system together with a real focus. I think in terms of technology, we have the ability to provide laptops and resources and equipment, and I think I've spoken here before that some of that pupil premium money has enabled purchase of bikes and things to allow young people to get to providers and colleges and things if they're doing apprenticeships. So we are working really hard collectively to try and improve the picture. I think there are always challenges at an individual level that sometimes you can't foresee.
Thanks, Joe. I think Councillor Smith, you were next in line.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to the issue of Ukraine, because I know the transfer scheme for the unaccompanied migrants from Afghanistan was brought up. It's only right, given the awful situation that's in Ukraine, that we do what we can for those that do seek refuge in the UK, especially those who are children and women and men who are unable to fight and of not age to defend themselves. What impact, if any, are we expecting in terms of children who we may be asked to support, who may be unaccompanied due to the crisis?
I guess the answer is at this stage we don't know. We don't know what we might be asked to do across the country at this stage, or indeed in Lincolnshire. What I can say is that we have incredibly positive resources that support the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that we do have, and those those Afghanistan children and families that have settled in Lincolnshire as part of that scheme. We've worked really hard in Lincolnshire to ensure that they are supported really well. I think we've been recognised as providing some of the best support in the country in relation to the families from Afghanistan, and I guess we will wait and respond when we know what the position is.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews, I believe you had a question.
I do, and it is about 16 and 17-year-old children in care participating in learning. I've just been trying to use my calculator. It looks as though we have 80 16 and 17-year-olds in care in the county, and actually this is a significant improvement on the previous quarters, but I recall Aidan telling us that in his defence, this was a rotten time of the year to take us to take a reading, and that you'd have to return a very low reading. So it's nice that he's gone back. But that means that the notes below, where it says there are 4 children who are involved in this project, does that actually mean it's 4? Or if we look at the 80 children, it sounds like it's more like 12 not engaged in education. So we've got 2 questions. Does this graph look right if we compared it to 2021 and 2020? And is there a sine wave where quarter 3 is always high and quarter 2 is always low and quarter 1 is sort of in the middle, and so on? So I'd really appreciate some data over time to see if this is following a normal pattern. And then I'd like to know about the children that are between, well, the 17% between 83, which is the national average, and the 100% of 16 and 17-year-olds in the county. What we're doing with them, are we including those in those projects, which looks really exciting. So overall, I'm saying well done, but I want to know what's going on behind the scenes, please?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I will, so I think in terms of the 4 and the 12, I think that could be around tolerance. And I think it's really difficult because the team really do know individual children and young people and want to really drill down into the individual circumstances of individual children. And I think it's for young people that would put us into the acceptable tolerance range, if that makes sense. I guess from my point of view, I don't want us to be suggesting that we're focusing on those 4 children to bring us into the tolerance level. And what we do is about holding everybody, and that is what the team do, I think. And they do know the journeys of individual children, and those children move in and out of those that are in and out, as you can imagine, because it is a group that have a number of different vulnerabilities. So we will have also young people that come into care at 16. So that also has an impact, because it's not it's about the circumstances in which they have come into care, because we have a statutory duty to support 16 and 17-year-olds who become homeless, if you like, and usually that's because of family breakdown. And so we do have some young people that we may have been involved with, may have not been involved with, who at 16, 17, family relationships break down, they are assessed, and then they become a child in care, and they will then be included in that cohort, if that makes sense. So sometimes it's not about, it will be because we've only just started to work with that young person. They've only just become on our radar because of the changing circumstances. So the cohort does change, but yeah, we're absolutely focused on the whole cohort as opposed to numbers that move in and out in terms of the tolerance, if that makes sense.
Councillor Matthews, you seem keen to come back.
Right, I don't want to push on that, but I asked the second question about the performance over time and about the pattern of the graph. Is this actually quite normal, is what I'm asking, or is it below par?
I think it is quite normal that there are fluctuations in terms of if you miss the deadline for entry into a particular college course or a particular programme. So there'll be a huge sort of emphasis and focus prior to September. If we've got somebody who came into care in October or November, that might represent a challenge. There are not seasonal, that's not the correct word, but in terms of where the education timetable flows through the year. So I guess it does change quarter by quarter.
Thanks very much, Joe. If we have no further questioners, I'll just recap on what we've been invited to do, and that's to review and comment on the performance of the measures that are either above or below the target range, which I believe we have done so in some detail. I therefore propose that the committee has reviewed the report and is satisfied with the performance of the measures that are either above or below target. And we have made some comments which Tracy has noted in response to members' questions. And so can I please ask you to raise your hand if you agree with the proposal? Unanimous. That is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is Sustainable Modes of Travel to School, SMOTS, Action Plan Update. I had to say that. I'm sorry, members. I just had to say that. The report represents an update on the action plan for implementing the Sustainable Modes of Transport to School strategy for 2020 to 2023, which was approved back in July 2020. And I'd like to welcome Mark Rainey, Commissioning Manager Commercial, who will be presenting this report. Welcome also to Dan Clayton, Sustainability Manager, who's attending via Teams today to help answer any questions. So it's over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. SMOTS always tends to generate a little bit of laughter, and I'm not quite sure why. But we have a statutory duty under Section 508A of the 1966 Education Act to produce a Sustainable Modes of Travel to School strategy. As Councillor Kendrick has just said, we brought that strategy here in July 2020. It's attached at Appendix A. And I think just to try and give you some legislative background for those that might not have been in attendance back in July 2020, because I think there's been quite a bit of turnover. We included the paper that was presented back then, just to try and give that background. We were then requested to come back in about 12 to 18 months' time to give an update on the action plan. That was delayed, I think, until today because I think of the capacity issues within the agenda back in January, I believe. So there's three key objectives within the strategy. One is to try and encourage and promote collaborative working across the council, to try and improve the transport infrastructure. The second one is about trying to promote healthy lifestyles for children and young people across Lincolnshire. And the third one is, not least, to make sure we're meeting our statutory duties with regards to home to school transport. The paper then goes on to try and provide you with an update as requested around the 6 actions in the action plan that's attached to Appendix C. And from our point of view, Action 1, which was about the creation and establishment of a sustainable travel group, that is on target. We have a group that meets quarterly. It has colleagues from across the council representing there. It also has the participation of the portfolio holder for children's services in attendance. And we've had numerous meetings to have a look at the work that needs to be done in relation to the strategy over the course of the last 18 months. Action 2, which was about developing links to school, primarily about trying to make unsuitable routes suitable for young people to walk or cycle to school. That's been designated as, not only has it been delayed, it is currently ongoing. The focus of that group has largely been around trying to use the £450,000 worth of capital monies we have available on an investor-save basis to try and look at establishing or re-establishing a public right-of-way at Toynton All Saints School over in East Lindsey. That would reduce the need for some contracted transport we've had to put in place due to the unsuitability of the route. And that would hopefully encourage active travel, not just for those children who are entitled as a result of the nature of the route, but hopefully it will also encourage those who are using car to get to that particular school to potentially look at using more active forms of travel. We have identified one other key route from Reepham to Cherry Willingham, which we are still looking at and exploring the potential ways that that might be able to be funded, hopefully without necessarily using some of the funding that is available from within Lincolnshire County Council. Our third action was around engaging with schools, around school travel plans. Again, that's been delayed, but things are improving. A large reason for the delay, obviously, is the impact of COVID, with schools having more important things to focus on, and also not particularly engaging well with external partners necessarily because of that. The team have begun to re-engage with schools from the summer of 2021, and particularly from the start of the new academic year, and they are seeing enhanced participation in the development of school travel plans. Action 4 was looking at some of our supplementary services, such as independent travel training and the Max Respect programs. Again, that's been delayed, largely because face-to-face services such as those are difficult to deliver during a pandemic with social distancing, etc. What we are gradually seeing, or what we are seeing, is a gradual return to the pre-pandemic levels in terms of those programs. Slowly but surely, in the case of things like Wheels to Work, we are starting to see demand increase and activity go back up. Our fifth action was around reappraising some of the unsuitable routes in the event that we might then be able to get hold of some more additional funding from other sources. That's ongoing. We are continuously looking at trying to identify not just unsuitable routes, but those that are feasible for improvement, and that's taking into account, several difficult factors, not least the cost involved, but also other issues that if we are looking at improving a route, it might mean the removal of education transport services because they will no longer be required. That can then have an impact on bus services, and in rural communities that can have a significant impact. So it's not just around the cost, there are other factors to take into account when looking at those that are most suitable to try and improve. Our sixth action, again, that's been delayed but is improving, and that's about working in partnership with the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership. They are starting to go back into schools again and delivering their sessions around keeping children safe to and from school, and also they are re-engaging with their school crossing patrols. You will note from the action plan they're having great difficulty with some of their recruitment, and they're testing and trialling out different ways of doing that to try and make sure that where sites require it, we do have a school crossing patrol. But we are starting to see the sessions that they deliver in schools, we're starting to see those reapproaching the pre-pandemic levels of activity. So in summary, most of the actions have been impacted by the pandemic, as schools are rightly focusing on more important issues. We are gradually returning to pre-pandemic levels of activity and delivery. And I think, as probably was stated when we came in July 2020, the actual delivery of the strategy itself is all the more difficult by the rural nature of the county. And we do encounter then significant costs when we're looking at trying to improve unsuitable routes. There is an alternative travel group, which my colleague Dan Clayton is involved with, that's looking to encourage active travel using central government funding from the Active Travel Fund. And they are working on specific initiatives with individual schools, as well as some more generic measures that will hopefully promote active travel. And one other thing to note around the strategy is, as the overall transformation of transport, including education transport, is moving to the Place Directorate, the responsibility for this strategy is also going to then move to the Place Directorate, and my colleague Dan Clayton within the sustainability team will be taking on the oversight of the delivery of the strategy from here on in. So that's the update to the action plan, and then obviously invited to for any comments.
Thanks very much, Mark. Do we have any comments? Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you for this. This is a subject dear to my heart, I have to say. And I'm involved in my own division in a currently emerging local cycling and walking infrastructure policy. So the extent to which this is all joined up is, and the funding is all joined up too, is something of great interest to me. And if you could explain a little bit more about that, because I'm not conscious of seeing SMOTs mentioned in this draft local cycling and walking structure policies I've seen, and obviously the more strands we can bring together to get things actually done on the ground, the better. And I think that's really the end story. I've read lots of documents, and I've actually not seen the budget committed to do anything. So, I mean, my concern comes from that end. But again, speaking particularly for my division, forgive me for doing so, I'm very conscious that we have a large independent school in the town centre, which causes a lot of, it has no off-street dropping off points within the town centre. It causes, it's pupils being dropped to school in cars, it causes a lot of congestion. And so I suppose my question is, what are we able to do as an authority to influence the private independent school sector to adopt more sustainable modes of transport to school, to its schools, particularly. I mean, I noticed that the school in question actually runs daily coaches as far away as Newark to collect 9 routes, one of which is all the way to Newark, which diesel-powered coaches is not exactly sustainable, is it? So, I mean, I think there's quite an issue there, both within the fact that you've got these coaches going over across such a wide area, collecting pupils, but also those that live within easy driving distance. Again, there's a lot of traffic being created and a lot of congestion being created for them. And again, I don't like the idea that they're out of scope, frankly. So I'd appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in terms of the funding, there's been quite a lot of funding in the early stages around sustainable modes of travel, and I think from the paper that was there as part of the background, we're going back to, I think, the launch of it in the early 2000s and then 2010. Since then, it's certainly fallen further down the radar, shall we say, from the Department for Education or Department for Transport, to the point where I think in their most recent guidance it's been moved to the back page. So it is no longer at the forefront. Obviously, I think central government has been doing quite a lot around the green paper around decarbonisation, and then I think the active travel fund. So my colleague Dan Clayton will know more about the active travel fund and the alternative travel group and what they're trying to do with that funding to try and assist with active travel modes. So he may be able to come in after I've tried to answer the other bit around how that's joined up. Certainly in terms of the joining up across the council, our sustainable travel group has colleagues from public health, has colleagues from transport services group, highways, planning, children's services and the portfolio holder. So it is very much a collaborative operation to try and make sure that we're fully aware and abreast of any developments that are happening within the council itself. In terms of congestion around schools, there is the opportunity to look at developing zones around the school safety zones, and that's something that the Road Safety Partnership will get involved with, and that's usually at on a case-by-case basis. As and when those particular issues are raised with them, they will have a look at it and see whether that's feasible. Whether or not as you say, that's something they would engage with an independent school is another matter. I don't think there would be any reason why independent schools wouldn't be able to access the Mode Shift Stars, which is the national accreditation scheme around developing their own school travel plans. However, we may, and might be something that Martin would probably know better about, the level of influence we may have over independent schools. I think it's sometimes difficult enough with the academisation of schools to have a bit of influence with our academies, let alone independent schools. Obviously, I mean, one thing I would say around coaches coming from as far away as Newark, we shouldn't not see the use of large contracted school transport provision as not being sustainable. May be different, as you say, if it's diesel coaches, etc. But certainly having children going on large vehicles in terms of commissioned education transport is far preferable to having 40, 50, 60 parents turning up in their cars all differently and delivering children to the school. It's debatable about how much influence we can have with those independent schools, but certainly at least the fact that they are commissioning contractors to provide them and deliver those children in large vehicles is at least something, I think.
Thank you. Dan, did you want to come in on this question?
Yes, I was just going to mention what Councillor Cleaver mentioned about the budget issue. So we're currently still waiting for the Department for Transport to confirm how much capital funding we've got for the 22-23 year to deliver the capital part of the cycling walking investment plans. So we've had the revenue side confirmed to deliver schemes like the bikeability cycling proficiency training, but we're still waiting, and they have promised it at least before the start of the financial year that we'll know how much capital budget that we've got. But as Mark said, the Mode Shift Stars scheme for school travel plans, I'd be happy to talk to the school in Stamford about using that, and there might be options to get involved with them and also look what they promised to do previously, maybe through the planning process with regards to active travel. So yes, I'll definitely start a dialogue with them and see what we can do to work with them on that.
Thanks very much, Dan. Thank you. I believe Councillor Whittington, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a few sort of observations. In terms of sort of parents dropping children off at school, in one of the village schools in my division, the local parish council conducted a survey a couple of years ago about how many extra vehicles appear sort of between school pick-up and drop-off point, and it was around about 120 in a sort of half-hour period. And I also know at a secondary school in my division as well, at the moment, we've got really big issues with parents parking outside the school in residential area, and congestion problems, like residents can't can't gain access, and currently working with Highways and Road Transport to actually get a school safety zone put in there with some restrictions. But with the second school, they did try to engage with the parents. Now, just around the corner, probably a quarter of a mile away, there's a hotel and pub. And the hotel and pub was approached by the school and agreed that at school pick-up and drop-off points, if parents wanted to drive into the car park there, pick their children up from there, it's literally a 5-minute walk away. There's no crossing of any main roads. But the take-up has been abysmal. There's probably only about 50 to 20 parents using it. They still want to cram outside the school. So the schools actually try to take a really proactive step and say, you know, and have been a really good offer, you know, to make a car park available. The parents aren't using it. So now we're into the situation of having to put in the school safety zone. And I'm just thinking, and I think it's around education, because, I mean, I suppose I'm going to say that when I was a lad, I was 3 miles from a secondary school. I used to walk or cycle, but there wasn't the level of traffic on the road, so it was a lot safer. But I'm just trying to understand what drives what, because at some point, parents decided they were going to drive their children to school. And therefore, roads are more congested. So then they say to themselves, oh, we better take our children to school because the roads are unsafe, because we're actually clogging them up. And actually, if we didn't drive our children to school, they probably could walk or cycle. I'm just trying to understand what's driving which, and how you educate parents to actually say, you know, sure you can trust your children to walk, especially if they're a secondary age, to walk a couple of miles to school or cycle a couple of miles to school, if the traffic on the road was reduced by us not driving the children to school. Do you see where I'm coming from? I'm just trying to... I'm just wondering what education we could do. And of course, the report also then talks about the carbon impact of all of that. And actually, you know, if you had children walking or cycling to school, you could reduce a big impact of the carbon footprint and move towards net zero. So what can we do? Because it seems to me that this is driven by parents, as opposed, you know, and a kind of vicious circle. You know, the more traffic that they're producing, it's crazy. But how you break the cycle? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's extremely difficult. I mean, one of the things that the school travel plans are designed to do is to try and get the buy-in of parents and carers to developing how they're going to try and reduce the number of people that will be using cars. I mean, I suppose to a certain extent we do live in an age where people are concerned around, you know, have a particular perception around dangers for their children. I think when we were doing the preparation back in July 2020, as you say, the number of children that used to cycle or walk to school, I think used to be around the 70-80% mark, and you're probably looking, I think, at less than half now, considerably less than half. So it is an issue. The school travel plans will help. I think it might be more of an issue, shall we say, with secondary schools, because our school travel plans do tend to be focused very much at local primary schools that lend themselves probably a little bit easier to developing those plans and encouraging you know, things like walking buses, etc., to try and reduce the level of car use. I don't know if Martin, you've got any further ideas around engaging through this? I think certainly the schools are the people we want to try and encourage to have that dialogue with the parents first and foremost.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think my experience of schools in terms of the challenges you were describing are recognised. I think schools have tried a number of initiatives and strategies to try and support this issue and manage the pressures outside of schools. I think some of Mark's points there around anxieties of children being able to walk to school safely are all absolutely right. There's also the dynamic now, I think, of families with competing demands, you know, needing to get to employment, drop children off at multiple sites, etc., and to do that quickly and efficiently draws on the use of a vehicle, which then puts pressure on outside of schools. That said, I think schools have been very creative at deploying things like bikeability, etc., to get a number of interests going in school. And I know certainly as a head teacher, as soon as you did bikeability, it kind of increased the interest of bikes and bringing them to school and on site, etc. So I think it's something we'll need to keep considering, and schools will keep pushing it forward in terms of an item, and maybe some further messaging through the partnership next year will be something that would help as well.
Thanks very much. Councillor Smith, I believe you have a question.
I do indeed. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. The fourth paragraph states the annual cost to the council for providing home to school transport, to and from school. Does this include or exclude those who are over the age of 16, who are disabled, and those who are not, and what contributions are made annually to fund in full or in part the transport of those students who are over 16, where a partial or full payment to fund that transport has to be made? Thank you.
Yes, the amount there is across the whole, from obviously those that are 4 or 5 are in certain instances even younger, all the way through to post-16 travel. Our post-16 policy at the moment does request a contribution for those that are eligible of £570 per annum. As far as I'm aware, the last time we had a look at the expenditure on that, we were talking about net expenditure of around about £2 million. So that's with there's a £1 million contribution that comes in from the 570 to the council each year. So overall on the post-16, it's a £3 million spend, but £2 million net. Does that answer everything?
Thanks very much. Councillor Clark, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know how many schools there is in Lincolnshire, but when you look on page 147, there's 14 safety zones that's been created and 12 more in progress. We've heard from a previous councillor about dropping off outside the school. Is it about time the council enforced safety zones outside the schools? Thank you.
Sorry, on page 147 was that? Yeah. Okay. Let me just have a look. Yeah, I mean, if you want to.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And actually, our highways team leads on the enforcement, but I have had some insight to it because we've had a query come in from a member of the public about a taxi parking. And actually, in terms of being able to enforce some of those, some of them are advisory, and that by law we can't enforce them. And then the ones that aren't, it would be for the police to enforce rather than the county council themselves. So I think it's a difficult issue. I absolutely understand why we would want them to be enforced, and where they work really well, schools are working with their parents to explain the importance of it and to develop that. But where there are challenges, there are some legal challenges to it. So because that's not my area of expertise, what I suggest to do is get a bit of a briefing to share with the committee if you're happy to take that, because what I don't want to do is mislead the committee, because it's not something Children's Services do. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Matthews, I believe you had a question.
Yes, I'm interested in how this policy has been influenced by the changes in the highway code, where drivers no longer have priority at junctions, all traffic must stop for pedestrians waiting to cross, cyclists can ride wherever they feel safest, drivers must wait for cyclists to pass, treat as if a motor vehicle, etc., etc. So presumably we've included that in this policy, and if not, when will we be, and will it make a change? Thank you.
I mean, obviously, I think they're quite recent changes. The strategy that we launched, I think, came in July 2020, and obviously was in development prior to those changes being made. I think, as myself and Martin were suggesting, there's still, I think certain people are still going to have to overcome the perception of danger regardless of the changes in the highway code, as to whether or not they would feel safe cycling and or walking in particular areas. Part of the issue I think we have, particularly in Lincolnshire, with the rurality of the county, is that, you know, some of those roads would also be not just your 20 mile, 30 mile an hour roads, but would be significantly higher, and people do have very specific perceptions of danger, even where we have a route that's suitable, where they wouldn't look to potentially use more active modes of travel, rather than looking to try and get a lift to a particular school. So I don't know whether, I'm just wondering whether Dan has got that on his radar as part of the alternative travel group. I don't know if Dan's able to come in to see whether that's been discussed there and what impact it may have on their future delivery.
No, I don't think that changes to the highway code have been discussed, but it's an obvious thing to include in the future delivery of the bikeability scheme. But to make the children doing the bikeability process aware of the changes to the highway code and the prioritisation of different road users, definitely. So I think that's something that we will discuss with the provider and look to build it into our SMOT's Motive Stars work as well.
Thanks very much. Next question is Councillor Sear.
I don't know if it's relevant, but because I'm not there in 2020, so I don't know. But I work very closely with road safety and highway. But my area is Mablethorpe Primary School. Hopefully we get something sorted out soon, because we don't have a lollipop lady. And now I ask for they do quick whatever fix by Lee's paint on the crossing, so they're aware. But something have to be done because it's danger, and the children really got knocked over. I know the school don't have what you call yopping point, so the people park loud, and you're aware of that. You know, Iบอกit. Other one, if you talk about transport and that, another school in my village, that's a Sutherthorpe, they are primary school, they have no parking. So at the farm lorry and there are, traffic can block up. I was always executive of the day. He aware of it, and we try to make it out more safety for the children. I know they have a bus, but the children who come to Sutherthorpe school is not from Sutherthorpe, but school bus. It come like far to Shuthorpe and Mablethorpe, but still a lot of car. So I don't know which way to think how to be safety for the kid, because only got one, what you call walking path, to cross. It's quite danger. So I work on it with the other safe partnership and executive on the highway. I saw you talk about the school in city, but this is village school. It's a danger. See, well, the village, in town, you can park somewhere, but not in the village. Only thing you can park in the field, but how can you go to park in the field? That's I want to ask. Thank you. I don't know if anybody can answer me that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of school crossing patrol sites, they do have an assessment that they will undertake to determine whether or not they feel that what is necessary. And as we've alluded earlier, there are some issues at the moment with the recruitment of the people to actually work those sites, and that's why they're trialling different ways of trying to recruit people. If you engage with the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership, then they are the people that will determine and undertake the assessment around the school crossing patrol sites. In terms of in relation to Thedlethorpe School, we will be obliged to provide a bus where there are a number of children who will be entitled to transport, who may live more than 2 miles away at the primary age from that particular school. And there could be a variety of reasons why they have to go to that school. It may be that other schools closer to them are fully subscribed, and therefore they may need to go there, or it may be that that is their nearest school. So, you know, we will always ensure that we try and use the most economical and the most sustainable mode of transport where we do have to provide entitled children with transport to school. And I don't know if there was anything else that anything else you wanted us to touch on?
Yes. You said 2 miles, but from Mablethorpe to Sutherthorpe take about 4 miles. And Chusthorpe, we further along. And children from that area come to Sutherthorpe school. Another thing is, I found the traffic warden for Mablethorpe only last 2 weeks, and they quit. So I found another one. I don't know how long it lasts. It's on course because these are the parents who volunteer to do it, and they can't even hack it for being a bill. So I don't know what's thing. I know I work together with other partnership, but you know, like I want you to aware, say, not just the town, it's the villager are in trouble, or you know, trouble with the parking, and that's it. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sear. I think we recognise those challenges that you're talking about, and it sounds like you're working with the right people to get the solutions to those. And again, you know, this is a really cross-cutting paper that you're scrutinising today in terms of the strategy, and we're getting into some of the specific challenges you've seen in your area. What I would say is it sounds like you're working with the right people, and happy to have those conversations later on and unpick them. But we're not involved in terms of the traffic wardens and those elements.
So thanks very much. Councillor Blackburn, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the logistics of this, but I've worked with school transport for well over 30 years. And one of the things that's always amazed me, and I understand some children have to travel on their own, some children have to have escorts. I'm not talking about those children at all. But the fact that children in care, a lot of their transport is organised by social services, and children that are not in care is organised by education for a certain period of time. And a lot of money I've found is wasted on the same, a car that can seat 4, taking one child to the same school from the same area, because social services and the education transport don't work together very well. And I know the logistics is not always that easy. I mean, there was one incident recently where all these jobs are sent out to tender to the different organisations, and you can telephone up and say, oh, I've got a spare seat. Oh, yeah, well, no, that's got to be in the social services budget, cannot be in the I mean, this child will probably end up with the education children in 2 weeks down the line, but this money is wasted, and it's been ongoing like that for a while, and I didn't know if there was any way we could sort of look at something like this.
I think if we've got a child that's entitled, they will always go through the education transport team. In terms of arranging that entitlement, there are occasionally instances for a short period of time, particularly at the busy parts of the year, and we're talking the start of the academic year in particular, where children have come into care at very short notice or may have moved placements, that it may be that social care will then arrange their own transport because it's not possible to put them onto the overarching mainstream transport that we've got available. They do always look to use the most economical method. There are occasionally reasons why specific children may travel separately from others. There are other reasons why vehicles may be, spaces on vehicles may be left free because of the mix of the cohort of people that are on that particular transport. It may be for a specific reason. But I can assure you, having overseen education transport for the last sort of 2.5 years and the pressures we've got on those budgets, we are continuously looking to make sure that we maximise the use of what we've got available by trying to make sure we use the most economical method. Some of the things that our colleagues within Children in Care or the social care teams will look to commission potentially separately might be where there may be family time or contact with other members of the family that could be commissioned separately on a short-term basis. And equally, if they had particular activities that fall outside of school, that may be commissioned by the social care teams in terms of going to our approved providers of taxis. But in terms of getting people to and from school, all of that is going through the education transport team, and they will have the information in terms of why that particular child is entitled, or where they're going from, where they're going to, and they will look to try and make sure that people are on the wherever possible what we would class as being the mainstream transport going to that particular school.
Yeah, I wasn't actually talking. I know there are a lot of children that have to travel separately, and because of the contacts and all that, and some can only travel with boys, girls, whatever. But I know that there are occasions where, for prolonged periods of time, 2-3 weeks at a time, where the budgets don't seem to mesh, and then that child might end up in the same vehicle that it could have travelled in. I just don't know if there's a way that the two sides can work together a little bit better. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there always is. That's sometimes due to delays in terms of knowing about particular placements of children in care. And I say this generally happens at the beginning of the academic year. We will have somewhere in the region of 9,000 applications between school offer day through to the start of the academic year, and more what we're finding is they get compressed into July and August, and the pressure then on the transport services group is to try and make sure that they're commissioning the right transport for the right number of children going from the right place to the right school, and it can become difficult in those, certainly in those 4 weeks leading up to the start of term and the first 2 weeks when term starts. It can be very difficult to gauge the levels of space and availability on each of the vehicles, and it might be that, yes, on a short-term basis, measures are put in place to make sure that children get to school, but eventually they do reach an equilibrium where they can almost catch up with themselves in terms of the volume of applications that are coming in. And, one of the things we're always trying to do is, from school offer day has happened, people know where their children are going to be going to school and may have an idea of whether or not they're entitled to home-to-school transport. We'll be encouraging them through social media now to get those applications in as soon as possible, because that means that then we will have a clearer idea before August, September hits of what space we'll have on what vehicles and who we might be able to add to those very quickly. I do appreciate, ultimately it does all come out of the same budget. It will be coming from the education transport budget, but it does occasionally mean, because of the nature of children in care, placements breaking down, placements changing, it does sometimes mean that they will have separate transport for a short period of time until we can, I suppose, get all of our ducks in a row and get people assigned to the right transport.
Question?
Thank you. Just to build on what Heather said about enforcement of traffic, I'm aware that highways are looking at 20 mile an hour, about speed zones, 20 mile an hour zones. I think that's coming up in May for scrutiny, which would mean that outside schools, they wouldn't be advisory. They didn't need to be advisory anymore. They could be mandatory. And also, of course, from the 1st of June, the County Council can take up the powers to civil enforcement of moving traffic offences. And obviously there's going to be presumably some policy development there whereby we can prioritise offences, or not offences, contraventions outside schools or in school zones. So it'd be great if we can build it all together, because I'm really conscious that perceptions of safety or safety concerns are a great deterrent to cycling and walking for children going to school. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and I don't believe we have any further. Councillor Smith, you just got in just before us.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very, very brief. The only thing I wish to say is it's for members and just be mindful around the new highway code. There are major concerns from various, not necessarily statutory bodies or groups, but people you generally, anybody you speak to in public around the concerns, whether it's a motorist, whether it's a cyclist, whatever they may use to get around. there are concerns around the new highway code and the rules and regulations that actually there may be more risk because A, either people aren't aware, or B, they are aware and don't change accordingly, but there are concerns around risk around that new highway code, so we'd have to wait and see how much of a help or hindrance that is, I think, before we can start championing it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll just recap on the actions required for us on this particular item. And we were required to review and comment on the progress made against the action plan, which I think we've had a very thorough discussion on that, actually. So therefore I propose that the committee has reviewed the report and has been assured on the progress made so far against the action plan. And can I ask you to raise your hand if you agree with that proposal? That is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 9, the last item on the agenda for today, which is our work programme, and it sets out the programme for this year. And it's over to you, Tracy, to run through it.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a couple of announcements to make in terms of amendments. In relation to the next agenda on the 22nd of April, there are 2 reports that have been removed. These are in relation to the review of open selector list and the review of closed order list. And this is because we've received further legal advice that these will now be Chief Officer decisions by Heather instead. So those 2 items have been taken off the 22nd of April agenda, which still now leaves 5 items on there, including 4 pre-decision scrutiny items. On the 17th of June agenda, the pre-decision scrutiny report on the children in care leaver strategy has been deferred to the 9th of September meeting, and this is to allow for more time for engagement of all the key stakeholders to be taken, and the decision for that will now be taken by the Executive on the 4th of October. Otherwise, that is the current work programme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Do members have any comments to make on this report? Councillor Gray, anyone indicating no? We're all happy? That's great, and obviously we've got that item I mentioned earlier for July. Yeah. Great. Well, the actions required, as always, in this case, is to review and agree the programme and to mention for discussion any items which we could consider for inclusion. I'm taking that we've done that, so if you would raise your hand that you agree with that. Marvellous. That's all agreed. So that concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. I hope the substitute members have found it interesting experience, and we'll see you on the 22nd of April. Thank you very much.